Hi, everyone. I'm Laura. Welcome back to the Fine Line Podcast. We are so thrilled to have Nicole Castronovo on with us today. She is the founder of the law office of Nicole Castronovo, where she practices criminal defense law and administrative law. She is fighting for people the system too often tries to silence. And if that could be the headline for the Lindsay Clancy case, it probably should be. So that's her day job. But at night, she keeps it real on her own podcast, The Truth and the Chisme, where she is bringing a mix of legal insight and straight talk to her own audience. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, thank you for having me, Laura. That was a great introduction. I need you as a hype woman.
Great. I'm there. Whatever you need me. So let's get into it. I assume anybody who's listening to the podcast now is on day 16 with us, has watched this trial from the very beginning, knows that we are on the defense case, knows that Kevin Reddington is calling his expert witnesses. You and I both know that Kevin Reddington is like the man, the myth, the legend. He is somebody people aspire to be when it comes to defense attorneys. So why don't you talk to me a bit about that? What are your views about him and how he's handling this case so far?
Oh, God, I love him. I think he might be my new favorite because, I've watched so many people. Style-wise, everybody's got a different style. I've loved attorneys like Johnny Cochran, very bombastic, to like a good F. Lee Bailey cross-examiner. But Kevin Reddington, what he does really well is he's very real and he's very human. And I think sometimes attorneys can sort of fall into the same trap that politicians fall into, of being kind of wooden and not authentic to people, not real, not relatable. And I like that he speaks plainly. He's not using fancy legal jargon. He says what it is. He says what he means. He gets to the point. He points out when other people are less than honest or being evasive, and he doesn't let them get away with it. And I also think just sly things that he's doing. I don't know if he means to be sly, but they're little sly things, like when the prosecution has treated Lindsay poorly, the comment he made about The Handmaid's Tale. Well, he got that out in front of the jury and the judge was like, no, sidebar, don't talk about this here. But he does little things like that. I also think for Lindsay, there are times that certain attorneys, their gender, their race, their age may actually make an optics difference for a client. For example, if I was representing a male that was accused of sexual assaults, perhaps it's better for him to have a female attorney because that signals that a woman's not afraid of him. A woman probably believes him, is not going to represent him if they think he's a sex offender. I think for Lindsay, the essence of her womanhood is being put on trial. Whether she's a good mother, she's a good wife, she's a good girl, she's a good daughter, all the things we're supposed to be. And Kevin Reddington looks like he could be, her father. He's a man. He is doing things physically with her, like just touching her shoulders lightly when she's upset, that show not only is this a human being that deserves comfort, but he's doing so and he's got this like fatherly protection over her, which I think is signaling she's worth protecting. Like, this person is worth something. And, the way he's handling the witnesses, he's not arguing with them. He's keeping them on task as far as, I'm not going to let you get away with not answering this question 4 times. And he's very good at laying the trap of where he wants to go, and then getting the person without them kind of realizing what has happened. But so many good things he's doing. Pro moves.
100%. Those are all the pro moves that we can learn from him. And a couple of the key points that you mentioned, I actually think at times he commands the courtroom more than Judge Sullivan does in that Handmaid's Tale, right? He could have easily gone to the sidebar, but instead he's like, I'm not doing that. And I know the camera's wrong. I know everybody hears me. So I thought that was a master move also. And when you said, he's trying to, by establishing holding her hand, holding her shoulder, comforting her, asking for breaks when necessary. It's not just that she's worth it, but she's worth more than the hand she's been dealt. And that's what he's advocating for, right? And for all those people who say, oh, she could have advocated for herself. No, she actually at one point was unable to advocate for herself. And that's why she needs somebody like Reddington to be able to do so. That's my take.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And I think that's always a challenge for any defense attorney when you have someone at counsel table is people assume that they've done something wrong because they're sitting there and they must be some sort of criminal or bad person or whatever it is. And so the more you can inject humanity into things, a lot of people don't love defense attorneys because they think, how can you do this job? Sure. But the point is that everybody, no matter how abhorrent in our jurisprudence, deserves the same treatment. And so that's another subtle way of reminding people, she's still innocent until proven guilty. Now, this is a different situation because she's pled to the mental health issues, but the burden is actually on Massachusetts to prove she's not, so that, her credibility is on trial. And so injecting that humanity is super important, I think.
100%. And you've made this point before, and I don't know if we talked about this off camera, but you definitely talked about it on your podcast, where he's a one-man show. He is doing this all on his own. He has nobody, second seating. This is a masterclass in being able to do the work and be confident in it, right?
Yes, he is a perfect example of you just need to know your case, which sounds super simple. But I mean, you've got to have that thing memorized. You've got to know where things are, what was said. And this is a case with a lot of evidence with her medical records, text messages, emails, all sorts of things. And the fact that he has such a command and memory of where certain things are down to the commas in her medical records is incredible, but speaks to his professionalism and his experience. He knows that file. And I love that I've seen him just walk from the courthouse with one file out and his water bottle. I mean, you should see me leave trial. I've got like 3 bags and a rolly thing and, all this stuff. And he's just kind of whistling out of there, with just his folder. He knows his case.
Exactly. He's done his homework, and it's the confidence that comes with experience. And I mean, if there's anybody who has the experience, it's certainly Kevin Reddington. So what do you think are some of the things he's doing right? Because right now, he is presenting his case. It's the defense's turn, and they're putting on their expert witnesses. So we had Condi, we had Lapizada, Cecil finished today. So we're on day 16. What's he doing right with his expert witnesses?
You've got to have an expert for an expert, which people don't realize if they're not, involved in the world of the law. You'd have no reason to know that. But if one side puts an expert forward, you've got to have someone to answer. And so I think he's picked the right experts to be on point. That's the other thing. You have to pick the right type of expert to answer back for the things the prosecution has said. But I mean, is it that hard to do right by your experts when it was like her providers were not experts in her area of treatment? I mean, we have a brand new spanking doctor who has never had a postpartum patient. And it's like, if my expert has had 5 postpartum patients, they now have more expertise than Lindsay Clancy's providers, which is pretty sad.
Proclaiming to be this expert in her field, where I think she ended up testifying that she had an interest, which is fine, but then be honest about your advertising. You're not an expert in your field.
Yes. Yes.
And I do think one of the points that you made before, when Reddington's doing his homework, all the medication and the names of the medication and the type of medication and the dosage, he has that down. And that's very important when you're arguing a case of over medication, polypharmacy, right?
Yes.
He knows he did his homework when it comes to that. And it's not easy to follow. And he does kind of put it in layman's terms for the jury, which I find to be helpful for me also, right? As somebody who understands medicine.
That's something that's hard. People don't realize about attorneys is if you get some case that has a very niche fact pattern like this, you as an attorney have to learn the subject matter and then you have to put it on. You learn a whole new thing, and then you have to be able to understand it well enough to explain it to other people. And so that is always the joke, right? Lawyers, if we were good at math, we'd be doctors. We are not capable of being doctors. So the fact that Kevin Reddington is like gotten himself up on pharmacology, I'm very impressed.
That's right. He has to become an expert in his own, field also of this case. And I think he's done a pretty good job. Where do you think he was most successful in crossing the providers, whether it was Tufts or Gelada or Paul? What was he doing right? And where was he most successful? And where did he gain his points?
The ridiculousness of the things that they said. I mean, what I liked that he did is every time they gave a ridiculous answer, did you notice he would repeat part of it? And he let them hang themselves with their own rope a lot. I will say he did not let up when they were not forthcoming about things like the comma thing. The comma thing was so great. If you notice, he comes up to the witness stand with each witness, shows them the documents, kept just keeping her on task. Like, is there a comma here? Is there not a comma here? And people don't like that. Jurors don't like that. No one likes dishonesty. No one likes when people play a little like too cute with word games and all of that. We're here on a murder trial. We're here with someone's freedom. This is very serious. This is not time to be, having a slap fight with Kevin Reddington about punctuation. And I think just also pointing out like the absolute negligence of the providers. He did so well, so easily and effectively. He didn't go into this deep thing about, well, this is the standard and this is the thing and just pointing out that they were only talking her through the computer or the TV or whatever he said, and not assessing psychosis in person. The amount of medications, the lack of response to the things she was saying and taking it seriously. And he did it really like simply and effectively.
That's right. And the lack of coordination and how that will effectively impact their civil trials, which we know are ongoing and at this quiet stage right now while they're pending tribunals. But they're going to have an impact, and we'll get into that a bit later. But you and I had talked offline about why these providers appear to be a bit cagey and really defensive, and how that comes across. And I think ultimately it's because they know that in a civil trial, those defense attorneys are getting two bites out of the apple. They're seeing how they testify in the criminal trial, and then they're going to see what kind of witness they make in the civil trial. It's going to be very telling. And you already have that issue with, Dr. Tufts, not only her lack of experience, but her combativeness when it came to that comma. No, I said no comma pressured speech, but no, it just says pressured speech. So, don't fight me on something that's really there. You're never going to win that fight.
I think this case is never seeing a civil trial, like the doors of a civil trial after their testimony, because she's married to that ridiculous colloquy with Kevin Reddington for life now. It's on video. If this goes to civil trial, the civil attorney, Exhibit A, is going to play that video of her fighting over things and saying, I had an interest, but I put that as my specialty and
That's
all
right.
of that. Like, so this video is 100% admissible, this testimony in the civil case. And I think that civil case, to me, in my mind, it's like, just write a check and move on. Like the provider just tanked that case for them.
I think one of the most telling questions that Reddington asked her was, do you know, like, the impact of your testimony here is going to impact that civil case? And she's sitting there being like, oh, I didn't know.
Oh my gosh.
Sure. Really? You didn't know? Nobody told you about that?
That is such a ridiculous statement. And also, she's not just anybody off the street. She's an attorney. She's probably had to deal with a team of attorneys in the last year because of the prosecution. I'm sure, she's had to deal with the insurance carrier for her malpractice insurance attorney. She's had to have this civil defense attorney on the lawsuit personally, as well as, with her malpractice insurance. So it's like the fact, and I'm sure these meetings occur together, with
Of
these
course.
attorneys.
Of
So for her
course.
to say, oh, I had no idea that this could be very bad for me, is a ridiculous statement.
Talk about dishonesty. That speaks to her credibility right then and there in such a small, minute way. She could have conceded it, right? And she chose not to. And that's probably one of the most frustrating things for her team, but that's for their civil team to, deal with, and a win for Reddington to on credibility.
And that's a very dumb thing to do, is not to concede an obvious fact.
Always, because it's an easy win for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about La Pizzada? She kind of was faced with tough questioning from the prosecution about violations when she was the chief medical examiner in Rhode Island, and what she came back, and I thought she gave a good answer, saying there were small violations, right? It was like a light bulb, and they were minor. It wasn't anything significant. Do you think that hurt her credibility at all, or was it just something that we had to do because we had no other things to actually test her credibility?
I definitely think that was they didn't have very much against her, so they were going to try to dirty her up that way. I don't know how effective that is. And again, you have to really, I always say surgical cuts when you're in trial work. You have to think, is this really necessary to put on these little minuscule ticky-tack violations she had? Or am I going to waste the jury's time? They're going to be bored and they're going to hate me, because the jury are 12 people that have life experience. Out of 12 people, and we actually have 18 in the box, as you've said, someone's going to have gotten in trouble at work before. That doesn't mean they're completely incompetent in the future from doing a good job. So it's like, someone's going to probably feel bad for that lady that even got, brought up and she had to explain it.
Right. And talk about alienating the jury on a small detail that really wins you no points again. Right. And to that point, I'm sure you saw all the coverage about Patrick Clancy's mom being questioned about being a Catholic, and burger being a sin. What points was that winning anybody? Please explain to me the thought process between these prosecutors who are not faring well in the court of public opinion, raising that.
Bringing up someone's religion in court is just completely inappropriate. Anyway, I mean, we have this separation of church and state. We are very always concerned about bias in trial. Granted, Massachusetts is a heavily Catholic state too, so I don't really know what that was about. I'm sure there is a high portion of jury members who identify as Catholic. So I don't know why that was brought up. I don't think juries like this, when it feels like the prosecutor was too snoopy in someone's life. Why are you looking in Patrick Clancy's mom's life to see if she is Catholic or Protestant or whatever? Why are you doing that? Why are you bothering this woman? Her grandbaby's passed away. Why are you going after her? And I just think that was a bad move. I think for anyone on the jury who is even a little bit religious, that is going to bother them. I would not appreciate being asked that question. Having my religious views put on blast on a witness stand, those are our most private feelings. And it was just super, super inappropriate to do that. Notice Kevin Reddington didn't object. Right.
He just let the judge do the dirty work.
He let the judge do it. And that's a pro move too, is if opposing counsel's so over the line, the judge is going to shut it down. Let the judge shut it down in front of the jury, because the jury's looking at the judge to get their cues. If you do it as an attorney, it just seems like a slap fight. I love that Kevin Reddington was like, let her do it. Let her walk right into doing this awful thing.
That's right. Because again, you're not winning any points. You're just making yourself look incompetent and not somebody that anybody wants to be behind. Yes. I completely agree. There are a ton of things that these prosecutors are doing, and not to belabor the Beau point, but they're doing things to discreetly impact the jury in one way or another, psychologically impact them. But again, not winning points and probably alienating them more than they're winning them over.
I saw an article, I can't remember where it was. It was a sad case where a young girl had been killed by her boyfriend, and the family and friends that were attending trial were wearing like pink t-shirts to support her because that had been her favorite color. And the prosecution made a motion that they shouldn't be allowed to do that because it would like inflame the jury. But then we have these two wearing the bows.
That's right.
That's right.
The double-edged sword. I saw this. You're totally right about that. Where does one end and one begin? I know, but I guess nobody's called them out on it yet. Wait for Reddington to do it one day, being like, by the way, prejudicial to have the bow in your hair every day. And, let's start taking those out.
If Kevin Reddington walks out for his closing with a bow on his head, my soul will leave my body.
I will just die right then and there. And should he? I think that's a fair recommendation. I actually think that's a fair recommendation. We had Dr. Condi, right? So if he's the forensic psychiatrist, and he never evaluated Lindsay, right? He only reviewed the medical records. But we had him, he testified to the severe adverse reaction she had to the meds, to her mental health decline, which is effectively what he has to be doing, right? Like she had this decline to psychosis, the polypharmacy, the medical missteps. So he talked about all of that. I think he did leave the door open a little bit to, she didn't tell her mental health providers about any hallucinations, any auditory hallucinations. How does Reddington get around that? How does he make the point that that's not necessary for what needs to be defended and claimed?
I don't think he does, actually. I think that she did by saying, I'm having intrusive thoughts. How do you have intrusive thoughts? I mean, like we hear our inner voice in our head, right? When we have a thought, should I go through this yellow light or should I stop? There's like a voice in your head. So if I'm Kevin Reddington, that's what I would say is, how did she not? I mean, she's saying she's having intrusive thoughts that are encouraging her to kill her children. They're not her thoughts, so they're coming from somewhere else. And I also think that even if that's not bought, making the point, whether she said, she wasn't hearing the voices or hallucinations or this thing or that thing, is all small potatoes for the larger topic, which is she reported she was having these thoughts of harming the children. She did what she was supposed to do. She gave that notice to everybody. She let people know about the situation to try to keep the kids safe. So I think that Kevin Reddington could fight that both those ways.
That's right. And I would agree with you. And then she did tell Patrick, right? She did tell her mother. There is this testimony from Cecil today that she told Patrick about the voice that she heard to command her to do it. And then you also have this layer of, not every woman wants to report that because of the consequences of what that might be. Your children are taken away from you, right? And that's a big concern and a big fear, because you don't want for a mother who loved her children, there's not one piece of testimony saying she didn't love her children, she wasn't a great woman. She doesn't want her kids being taken away from her. It would have been so easy if she actually felt that way to say, oh no, I'm having, these thoughts. But she didn't. She wanted her children with her. She didn't want them taken away. She cared for them. And that was a fear and a concern of hers. So I think that's an interesting way to, fight that fact.
Yeah, I think no one's talked about that too, which is how scary that must be if someone's feeling that. If I tell my spouse, are they going to think I'm crazy and dangerous and want to leave me and take the kids away? If I tell the doctors, are they going to report me to DCFS? Am I going to lose my kids? Are they going to go to foster care? All of those things. And maybe she felt more comfortable because she knew the system a little bit better, because she was a labor and delivery nurse. So she would have understood DCFS like processes that really regularly comes up in labor and delivery. But the other side of that coin is, even knowing those things, that fear is still going to be there for any mother. And even in the face of that fear, she still did the right thing.
He made the point that she called the suicide hotline, right? And she didn't get the care that she required because she hadn't formulated this plan yet. Supposedly, this is what their basis was. Well, you didn't formulate a plan for suicide, so we can't actually help you. And obviously, these are things that hopefully we all take out of this case for change, in the medical profession. But we're dealt with the facts we have. And that's one of the many failures of the system that's highlighted in the case. And I think he did a good job of, making that point also. And then we have Cecil. And I know Cecil just went on the stand today. Two of the main points he brought up: she's not a belayer, she's not lying, and confirmation bias. I didn't come to my conclusion. The conclusion came to me through the facts. And I think that the prosecution even bringing up this notion of confirmation bias and suggesting that, he's compassionate towards her, he likes her, is just so misaligned with what they should be doing. And it actually frustrated me.
The best argument is that he likes Lindsay Clancy. That's their best argument. Do you really want to highlight that for the jury, that a professional who didn't know her from Adam, and she's accused of drowning all three, or strangling all three of her children, and he still likes her? So do you really want to highlight that? I mean, and just because someone doesn't give the opinion that the prosecution wanted doesn't mean he liked her either. He just didn't come to the finding that they wanted. So, they are refusing to accept facts for facts and saying, well, it must be some untoward reason. He just likes her. He favors her.
And he would jeopardize his whole professional career because he likes her and wants to lie on her behalf, because that would behoove him.
People can't get the gravity of to either unless they practice law. Is for these experts, this is their Super Bowl. Their entire career rises and sets on them being televised and giving a good opinion or a bad opinion. Because if they give a bad opinion, that can be used against them in any case coming forward. No one's ever going to hire them again. So this is their moment. So I think that's a great point. He is not risking his entire career to just favor Lindsay Clancy on this very high profile death case.
So he can be impeached in another trial, because I'm sure he's still practicing. It's so laughable. And I do think this is one of the strongest things so far. Aside from La Posada's violations, I don't think there is much to impeach these witnesses with, prior testimony from other cases that they gave expert opinion. And they're standing, pretty strong. They're not losing points on that. So, kudos for the prep, and kudos to make sure you got the right experts, like you said before, and the right experts in the specialty that you need them to opine on, right? And I think that Cecil was one of the only ones who, was asked to a reasonable degree of medical certainty. And that's one of those catchphrases in medical malpractice. Yeah. That's what you have to ask of your experts. And he was the only one who actually had to do it with Reddington. And, he ultimately said, her diagnosis is psychosis, and, probably with some bipolar elements. So he came up with a diagnosis. He gave us a reason for what state she was in. And I thought he did a really plain and simple job. I liked him. I thought he was credible. I also liked his demeanor. He didn't come off arrogant, which I think is so important for an expert.
It's important for doctors, especially. I think that medical experts, more so than most, can come off as arrogant. And a lot of people don't like doctors because they feel like they get talked down to when they go to their medical appointments, etc. So it's good that he was likable.
You know what he also said that I thought was important? That psychosis doesn't lower your intellectual functioning. You can still do normal things in a psychotic state. And that was something that George Parning had told me. So Andrea Yates' defense attorney, he said that's something that you need to know, right? And I think that's important for, the prosecution who's making this kind of case of, well, she had a normal day. She was having one of her best days. It seems like the timeline was very calculated, but she could still be in the throes of psychosis, even despite those things. And I thought that was an important point that both him and Reddington made.
I've learned a lot about psychosis just through this whole thing. And so we automatically think of the person who's having delusions that, I'm not talking to you, I'm talking to a dragon or something so far gone. And the fact that, yeah, you could still be making lunches and getting up and taking out the trash and be in the throes of psychosis is something I don't think many of us knew about before.
Honestly, I don't even think I knew about psychosis before. Postpartum depression, 100%. Baby blues, 100%. Things that we've experienced as moms and our friends or our communities that we don't talk about because we think is slightly taboo. Those are the things we know about, right? And now to kind of know that, thank God these are like normal feelings and we're getting it out there into the world, to be able to talk about and to be able to have like common conversation about. But psychosis, such a new concept to me. And I'm so glad that we're learning about it because it's coming up in so many different contexts. And it's obviously something we're going to talk about at the end of this podcast, but other psychosis cases, not just postpartum, that we're seeing, insanity defenses being successful. So really interesting. And it just leads you to believe, like, why is this only coming out now? Where were we, after Andrea Yates? What did we learn and why did it take so long? What do we think comes next for the prosecution? Are they doing a good job with their case in chief? Have they done a good job at their case in chief? And what's next for them, when they have to actually combat these expert witnesses and we have the proverbial battle of the experts?
I think they did a terrible job with their case in chief. I think they should have never put this case on. They should have accepted her guilty plea and let her live out her life at the state hospital. She is disabled now. I mean, what quality of life does she really have? Let her have had that at least. The fact that they took so long. They put this case on for 4 weeks, too long. Jury doesn't like to stay there for a long time, so the jury might already be holding that against them.
Amen. I second that.
A lot of cumulative testimony. We didn't need every single person provider that they put on, especially that one lady who wore glasses on top of her head. It was like, I don't know anything. I don't know where I am today. I think their conduct and demeanor in the courtroom has harmed this case. I think they were a turnoff as far as, women, we have to be very cognizant of how we advocate and not become bitchy and mean and catty and petty. And they looked like all those things. Women, we need to be a little gentler. We need to get out our evidence in a bit of a different way. And they just seem to bully Lindsay Clancy. The evidence that they put on too, where they were showing like autopsy evidence and the dead kid's clothes and all of that. You have to think a jury. I've worked in criminal law for almost 20 years. I've seen a lot of photographs and evidence and crimes of violence and all of that. But I've chosen that profession to expose myself to. The jury did not want to choose this case. They didn't want to ever hear this stuff. They are actually being traumatized by seeing all of these things. And I think that the prosecution's hurt itself potentially in showing the jurors like grotesque evidence that didn't really matter at all for no reason.
100%. And it was so gratuitous. Like, there was no reason for it. But this is like their theme. They're doing things that don't win them points. So ultimately, at the end of the day, what's the lesson we're going to learn here? Is it going to be, this is not how to actually prosecute a case? Question mark. These two ladies, listen, they're incredibly experienced. They've been with the DA's office, one for 22 years, one for 15 years. They're heads of their departments. So they know how to try a case. It's just, and I suspect that they were probably chosen for this case because they are two females, but they really play their cards against them. And I really watch every day questioning why they do the things that they're doing. And who in the background is saying, oh, this is smart. This is a good job.
Well, the prosecutors, I've noticed over the years, some prosecutors can be colossal bullies. And they get away with it because the person they're bullying in a criminal case is someone who's accused of a crime, who already has a prejudice and a bias against them, and is seen as probably being able to take it. They're not good when we have someone like a Lindsay Clancy who is sympathetic, and then they're using the same things, the same demeanor they use for a career criminal for a mother who, no matter what, her children are gone now. And so it's not playing the same way. They probably were, if they were trying narcotics cases, this
That's
kind
right.
of, fist banging would work. But for this case, you've got to read the room. You've got
Right.
to read the room and know how to put it on.
That's exactly what George Parham said also. This is not like any other homicide case, right? This is a lady who took the lives of her children. This is a completely different lens. You approach it completely differently. You could not be more spot on with that. 100%. Also, one other thing that they did that really frustrated me, and I know you'll appreciate this as a mom, when they took out that journal and they were like, well, she told the nanny to cut the cubes, their food into like 2x2 cubes. Do you know what I did the next day? I literally went into my journal, whatever it was on my phone, and I was like, what were the notes I left for my caregiver? And they could not have been more controlling. I was like, put her to sleep at 2:20, 2:21. Don't give her food past 5. Make sure she's on her back, not her side. It has to be zipped up halfway, not full. I mean, if Lindsay Clancy is deemed controlling, then I must be 10 times worse.
And the whole thing about the cutting up the food, do these prosecutors not have kids? If you have a toddler, I'm not going to give my 3-year-old an entire grape, right? I'm going to cut those grapes before I give it to him. So if I left a note for my babysitter that says he likes grapes, please cut them first, though. I mean, that's just common sense if you have had little kids.
That's right. And I kind of like when Patrick was just like, and the nanny both testified, like, those were helpful. Those were helpful comments, right? Those weren't controlling. So if you're trying to make this controlling, premeditated argument, again, you're falling back, flat in the face on that one. I guess we're going to have to wait and see. And I would love to have you back on once they put on their rebuttal witnesses to see what they actually say and to kind of weigh the two sides of Reddington's witnesses, prosecution's witnesses, and the scorecard and who comes out the winner.
Absolutely.
And again, I think we're going to get another master class on cross-examination by, I kind of just want to call him Kevin, like Kev. I don't even want to call him Mr. Reddington. I'm like, Kev, my buddy, that we talk every day between 9 and 4,
Yeah, I want him to be like my uncle or something, my mentor.
I feel like he just kicks back in Cape Cod after all this is done, on boat, fishing somewhere, living his best life.
Kevin Reddington seems like a good time to me. For sure.
I agree. I totally agree. So how do you think this case is actually playing out? And we've touched on this, the court of public opinion, social media and beyond. I feel like the Andrea Gates case was not televised, right? And you didn't have this 24/7 commentary from everybody. Where are they? What are we learning from it? And is it hurting or helping Lindsay?
Oh, I think it's helped her tremendously. I think without this, she would have been damned to hell. I think watching the cruelty that's been exhibited to her, along with the kindness of Kevin Reddington, has changed this. It reminds me of, America for a speech in Barbie about there's no good way to be a woman. You're too fat, you're too thin, you're too smart, you're too dumb. All of those things. That is exactly what's going on. Lindsay Clancy left instructions so her child didn't choke. She's a bad mom. She, gets postpartum depression. She's a bad mom. There's no winning for moms at all.
And, we were talking about technology. And I think, we talk about strengths of all Reddington, some of the strengths of the cross, the prosecution. Mm-hmm. But technology, I feel personally like it's been a weakness in this case and lack of use of technology, especially in this day and age. But I kind of want to hear your take on it. What do you think, baby?
My trial advocacy teacher, and this is years and years ago, told us always have a visual aid. You're not that interesting. That was hammered into our heads. Have something for people to look at. I think Kevin can get away with it a little bit more because 1, he's very dynamic, and 2, he's older. And I've noticed that people kind of don't expect an older person to do a PowerPoint, etc. That's not their jam. Prosecution, I feel like they've got to use the technology. They're showing elements of a crime or elements to beat this insanity. And I think it's much more effective for them to be using a PowerPoint and putting up, the law or a timeline of events, maybe rehabilitating their witnesses a little bit better with putting up the document so the jury can see it. And then that puts it in the jury's perspective, lets the jury decide. But if you're just keeping that piece of paper to yourself, that maybe helps your witness, your jury's not seeing that. And I also think that putting up some of the documents where we've had providers testify, like really incredibly, would be helpful too.
Yeah, they need the medical records up there because the prosecution reading it out of the record, yeah, that's one thing, but seeing it and seeing it word for word, I don't want the providers up there with their own binder of their medical records. First of all, they lost me when they're like, oh, I don't think I'm on the same page as you because it's not the same, record numbers as you have. I mean, that was so unnecessary, right? At least if you're going to have a copy of the records, give the same exact copy to your witness. But second, that much more impact. The jury's going to remember that. They're going to remember that they read something on the screen versus I have to think about that and then look through the records later. And was that an important point? I don't remember. Practicing in the med mal arena, it just goes farther with the jury. And anytime I've told a jury after we get a defense verdict, they say, oh, that technology, it made it seamless. I could see things. I could visualize things. It just gave me a better picture. And I think maybe, that's one of the things, especially I agree with the prosecution is lacking. And they should probably be able to know better at this point.
Seeing something in black and white where it's problematic language, as an attorney when you get that, whether it's been in a transcript or in a medical record, or I've seen it, in a construction note, whatever. When you get that one thing, you're like, holy moly, those are terrible words. I mean, showing someone that in black and white and letting them see it themselves is much more startling, because otherwise I'm saying, take my word for it that the document says that. I don't want to ever insult the intelligence of my jury. They can read. Let me put it up and they could see that this is a problem. Would they like if their medical record was wrong?
Or sparse. So it's interesting
Yes.
because Dr. Connie used that word. The medical records, Tufts medical records specifically, were sparse. Put those sparse records up. Come on, Devs. I want you to show them that it was checklists, check boxes, right? Where we kind of are glorifying speed over quality, right? Where we're just checking what needs to be checked versus analyzing what needs to be analyzed, or important information that you have to put in the record so that either you as a provider will remember it down the road, or somebody else who talk about continuity of care can actually read that note and know what's actually going on. It's not just a check mark.
I hate the doctor. I won't go. I haven't been the doctor since my last baby. Like, I will not go. But when you do go to the doctor, they don't look at you most of the time unless you get a good one. And they're like this. They're on the computer. And they're just like checking things and writing notes and whatever. And they're ignoring you half the time. So I expect at a bare minimum, those notes better be pretty good if you're ignoring me the entire time. I guess I'm just expecting you're taking it down verbatim because you're not speaking to me.
Right.
Because it's become so computer with medical records.
And like, there's so many implications for that. I was talking to somebody about the civil cases and like what kind of implications that's going to have for trying a med mal case when you have portals of messaging between doctors and how you define the standard of care that way, or telemedicine where you're looking at somebody through a video screen or a computer, however you want to define it if you're kids, or a television rather. We didn't even say computer, you said television. What is the standard of care going to be? Because I don't think it can be the same as somebody who's actually in office being treated, where you can see all of their physical clinician dynamics, physical, examinations and all of that versus a person on the screen head up.
Yeah, and I think that there's something interesting. I mean, at least talking to Dr. Leslie Dobson on my podcast, what kind of shocked me that I learned from her was, what a skeleton crew some of these places can be operating on. And when you talk about med mal, to me, I don't practice this area, but I imagine if someone has very complicated cancer, you hear about doctors roundtabling together with different specialties and looking at different aspects and deciding a patient's like course of care for their cancer treatment, for example. But it seems like that doesn't exist for mental health, you know?
We talked about where the law is headed on this, right? We
Yeah.
have two kind of seminal cases and important cases that had decisions recently, and it's the LaTarsha Sanders case, so also a Plymouth County case of a mother who killed her two children via stabbing, was found guilty, but now the case the decision was overturned and it's going to be retried. It was previously tried by Judge Sullivan.
Yes.
So it's going to be retried. And her post-conviction, or her post-arrest rather, medical records that were precluded at trial previously are now going to be admissible, which is so interesting and so dynamic in this context. And then we had Precious Bland, who down in Florida was actually found not guilty by reason of insanity after drowning her child in what was later to be understood as COVID psychotic state. And again, right at like the forefront of these mental health criminal law cases. So just kind of giving your take on where you think this is headed.
I think we're always slow to catch up to the times with the law. I think a big example of this is technology. You know, it wasn't until recently in California that revenge porn was a crime. Before, you could just send someone's naked photos out and have no consequences. And now that's a felony here.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we have to catch up with where society's at. I do think, especially since like post-COVID, we've gotten much more aware of mental illness because so many people suffer during that time. People are so much more open, I've noticed, about talking about attending therapy or what medication they take for depression. And I think those are all good things. At least in California, we're having a lot more forms of judicial diversion, which is a fancy term to say a criminal defendant can earn a dismissal of a case on different mental health grounds. For example, we have like a blanket mental health diversion for anyone who basically their mental health push them into doing whatever the crime was. They have the opportunity, if they do things the judge asks, like go to therapy, enroll in anger management, etc., that they can earn a dismissal. But there's many more forms of that as far as mental health, even in California. Like we have diversion that's for veterans only, related to any mental health that injuries they could have suffered in connection with their combat service. We also have regional center diversion, which helps like developmentally disabled adults too. And so those are three like kind of avenues I can just think of in California law that are newer to try to aid with, instead of having someone suffer, incarceration from a mental health episode, getting them treatment, seeing if they're able to stop a criminal activity, and then rewarding them with a dismissal if that's what the case is. Like, why should they have to not only suffer from having this debilitating disease, but then also now be potentially like a convicted felon who can't get a job?
Talk about like effective rehabilitation, right? Like this is actually targeting what the issue is and trying to rehab that versus not providing the resources that are necessary to do it. I think it's genius to incentivize that. And I think you're absolutely right, where the law and medicine, have to catch up to one another. But I think we're totally at that inflection point. And I think that this is why this case is catching everybody's attention, right? She speaks to all of us, all the mothers out there, all the women out there, maybe not the prosecutor, it's just the broader, community.
The girls, it speaks to. Those are not girls right there.
They are not girls, right? They're fighting you for your boyfriend. They're not trying to be like, he was terrible. Oh,
yes.
That's so funny. But I honestly, I have loved chatting with you. You are a wealth of knowledge, but also so humble and cool. So thank you for taking the time. And I want to have another discussion with you because I think there's more. There's more to the story after Resnick and Spinelli and, some of the plaintiffs' side experts go on.
I know. I try to catch up each day. It's like a lot each day just to catch up,
It's
of
exciting.
each person. So definitely we should do this again before this case is over. And thank you for having me. It was super awesome to talk to you.
And just so you know, and everybody, all the viewers know, your podcast is amazing. Everybody needs to go check it out. You are phenomenal, and you are, some great guests. So check it out.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.